Okay. Oh, so my name is AmyJune, all one word, title, camel case, capital J. I live in California. I will be at MidCamp next week because a lot of my favorite people are going to be there. I work at Red Hat, but more Red Hat adjacent. I work on the editorial team for opensource.com. So I love Drupal. And so one of my major jobs at opensource.com is getting more Drupal content on opensource.com. So it promotes Drupal a little bit more in the wider open source community. So with that, and I also won an award. I already showed that and people have seen it on film, so we don't need to do that. Let's see. Okay, so y'all should see my contributing back to the code slide. And I'm going to move some stuff around because it's all in the way. And I have it on my whole screen because I'm going to show Drupal pod too, and I don't want to flip back and forth. Okay, so core versus contrib, just for people, I don't want to assume anyone's level of knowledge as far as Drupal goes. So Drupal has a core code system, you know, that you install and you can do, but then it also has ways of making it extendable through distributions, themes, and modules. So when we talk about contributing back to Drupal, we can be talking about contributing to core, or we can talk about contributing to the contribution ecosystem. So I want to do like a kind of like 1,000-foot view and then 100-foot view of the issue queue, just to kind of like familiarize people with how to find a good issue, how to make corrections to an existing issue, you know, a few different scenarios. So the issue queues are essentially like our community to-do list. All projects have them, you know, not just core, but the extended community too, you know, the modules, the distributions, and the themes. And triage, what that means is it's making sure that the issues are still relevant. So what I like to tell folks when they first get started, they can be in Drupal for many years and never contribute, you know, so this is more that like first time experience into the issue queue is really just, you know, start small and work your way up. So triage is a good first task because you can go through an issue and see if it makes sense. You can tag issues, you know, make sure that, you know, if it's an issue about a JavaScript, or maybe it's an issue we're going to work at a camp, we can tag it, and that way people can find it easier. I'm going to talk a little bit more about tags in a bit. Testing and reviewing code is a great way to start in the issue queue. Because you don't have to create the code yourself, but you can test the code. So sometimes that's a great way of learning the code too, is starting out with that review process. Oh, this slide's a little antiquated. You can apply patches and re-roll patches, and you can still do that. But for folks that don't know, we're really getting out of that patching ecosystem, and we've moved more into a more development workflow with merge requests and things like that. But you'll still see some issues out there with patches. And then updating summaries is a great way to help out when you're first starting. So issue queue 101. Sometimes the best contribution is reporting an issue or a bug that you have. And lots of people ask what kinds of issues are worth reporting. Well, all of them are, because you can't make the assumption that because you're a beginner or because you're new to Drupal or you've never given back, that bug doesn't exist for someone. So it's important to, you know, report all of the issues. Of course, you have to look and see if it already exists, but reporting an issue is a form of contribution. So you have an issue or a bug, you know, like I said, you want to go through the issue queue and make sure that it doesn't already exist, because we don't want to create redundancy or churn in the issue queue. And I'll talk about some ways to create an issue that makes it easier to search for later for people who are looking for the issue if it already exists. So if the issue already exists, what can you do? You can update any changes. You know, you can report that if you had similar findings. You can you know, make sure that people like, you know, it has the correct version on it. Confirm that it's a bug or an issue, or maybe it's a feature request and it's something that you would like to see happen. So confirming an issue or, you know, kind of validating it. Sometimes people will just post the issue with no steps to replicate or validate. So updating that issue summary to include steps to help the next person, like, how did that bug happen? Well, I enabled web forms and I had easy breadcrumbs installed and X, Y, and Z. And then if you know the solution or you've created the patch or the merge request, adding steps to validate. So the next person who tests the patch or the merge request can go through and make sure that all of those steps, the bug is actually fixed. So this is an image of the issue queue. This is for Drupal core, but all of the issue queues look really similar. You can see here that you know, it's color highlighted. We can see that the needs work issue is highlighted in red. The needs review issue is highlighted in yellow. There are different columns for all the different metadata, and I'll talk about metadata in a bit. There's filters that we can use to refine our search when we look in the issue queue. But the really nice thing is there's an advanced search button. So, okay, so here's the difference. So there's this advanced search button, and when you select that, it opens up more metadata for you to fill in. So before, you can, you know, search with keywords, you can find open issues or closed issues, you can search by priority or version or component. But when you hit that advanced search button, all of a sudden you can, you know, search for an issue from, like, I knew Bob created an issue a couple of weeks ago, but I can't remember the issue. I can search in that submitted by, it's all autocomplete. You know, I can type B Snodgrass and, you know, see what issues that he's created. I can see, it also now lets me search by tag or component, you know, so you won't see that advanced fields open until you select that button at the top. So as a beginner or a novice or anybody really working in the issue queue, I do think that there's things to kind of steer clear from. There's things that are definitely a waste of time, especially if you want to feel accomplished or you haven't done it before and you want to see some results. I wouldn't work on any contributed modules that aren't actively maintained, you know, something that hasn't had a release in 2 years, you know. I wouldn't necessarily work on an antiquated version of Drupal, you know, unless you have a Drupal 8 site, you know, and you need a patch and you would like to submit the patch for someone else. But if you're doing it to kind of help move the project forward, make sure that you're working on something that's actively maintained. If there's lots of issues in a contributed module that are marked won't fix, and if you look at them and you can see that the maintainer really isn't interested in doing anything anyone else suggests, that's probably not a good space to work. Issues that aren't current, you know, again, you know, if it's a Drupal 6 thing, maybe, you know, skip that one. This one always surprises people. I also say don't work on issues that are over 100 comments long. And 100 comments seems like a lot, but if there's discussion going on, 100 comments might be okay. But if you're like a real beginner and there's a lot of stuff going on in that issue queue, maybe less than 20 comments, because what can happen is maintainers are discussing what's going on, but not updating the issue summary. So a lot of the activity and a lot of the to-dos are going on in comments. And when that comment field is, you know, over 100 comments long, it can be hard to follow. You know, maybe the status has changed lots of times, you know, and that creates more comments. You know, someone puts in a patch, there's a lot of discussion, there's argument, that kind of thing. And then as a novice, sometimes I advocate that people maybe work on issues that aren't critical, work on like an issue that's marked normal or minor, because those critical issues really need to move fast, because, you know, whether it could be a security update, it could be, you know, a white screen of death. And so kind of balance that out with your skill set and your knowledge. I see that there's some comments, so I want to just make sure that Okay, we're fine. So looking at an issue, the life cycle of an issue, first we submit an issue, and this is kind of a linear time frame. It can kind of go back a little bit, but it's a straight path sometimes. Someone submits an issue, someone actively works on it. They're actively working on it. There's some discussion and collaboration in the issue queue. If multiple people are working on it, people will upload solutions with either a patch or a merge request, and then they'll mark it needs review, because you can't review your own work, much like development. So in the needs review cycle, people will come in and they'll, take screenshots, get it up and running in a Drupal environment, do their steps to replicate. And if it passes all the tests and they think it looks good, then they'll mark it reviewed and tested by the community. If something fails, or the patch isn't quite right, or the merge request isn't quite right, someone will mark it needs review, and then it will kind of go back into that discussion and collaboration mode. But once it's reviewed and tested by the community, maintainers will see that and they'll approve it and merge it into the code base. So the metadata, we talked about this, and metadata is critical for when people are searching for issues. So it's not like super critical or wrong, or if you don't get it right, because people can come and fix it for you, especially if you're a beginner. But when you write a title, make sure that you use concise, oh, there's a typo in there, concise title with keywords. That way it's searchable. So think about how someone would search for that issue and make sure those keywords are in the title. Assign it a project. This one up here is for Drupal core. Usually if you're in like the meta tag module issue queue, or if you're in like the project browser issue queue, that will already be populated. So be mindful of where you're posting the issue. You select the version, the component, and here's the tag field. And I think I talk about this again, so forgive me, but something to mention about tags. Tags are useful for searching. Tags are great if you're running a contribution day, because people can search like MidCamp 2023 and see what we're working on for a specific day. But what I want to mention about that tags category is it's autocomplete, and autocomplete is our friend. So let it complete the tag for you. Typically, there is no reason for you to complete a new tag unless it's for an event. And I'm going to use accessibility as an example. A couple of years ago, me and Rachel cleaned out the issue queue of tags because accessibility was spelled wrong 3 times. So let autocomplete do its job for you there in that tag field. So we talked about the title, the category, this is where you indicate that if it's a task or a bug or a feature request, a roadmap, support, and this is a drop down in that metadata field. Priority, this is the relative importance of an issue in relation to the project and other issues. Again, are you fixing a typo? That's very minor. Are you updating documentation? That could be minor or normal. But if it's something that breaks your site or breaks functionality of a different module, that's a critical issue. Status, the current state of the life cycle that I showed you, going from, needs work or, active, reviewed and tested by the community, and then fixed. And then there's some other statuses that maintainers use that are fixed, postponed and things like that. But we're basically looking at like, is it active? Is it in needs review? Has it been reviewed and tested by the community? And version, normally this is set to the current development version that the code base is in, because we're working forward, but if maybe it's a bug that's just in the 9.4 branch and not in 9.5, that's what you would indicate. It's just easier than using the exact version where you notice the problem again. So, typically we set it to the current development version of the code base. And component. This is the part of the project that the issue falls in. You know, this can change based on the projects, especially non-code projects, camps. When you set up your project from the beginning, you can choose what falls in that component menu. Core has lots and lots of different components, but you know, something like MidCamp, a community issue queue might have like meetings, sponsors, volunteers, things like that. For a code base, you might have something like JavaScript or documentation. You know, again, that changes depending on the project. Tags, we talked about tags, you know, again, it's a keyword or term that helps categorize the issue even more, you know, and again, I cannot stress this enough, autocomplete is our friend. And then assigned. Okay, this one's kind of tricky. You know, there's this field and you want to use all the fields, right? You want to fill in all the metadata and there's this assigned field. So assigned is really the username of the person who is working on the issue. And there's two different ways to fill out this field. One is you can leave it unassigned. The issue is not assigned to anyone. This is the typical setting for issues and it is the default. But then you, as a non-maintainer of a project, can fill in your own name, assign yourself the issue. This is okay in Contrib space, but typically when we work in core, we never assign ourselves an issue unless we're a maintainer. And typically, if you're not a maintainer of the project, the only name that shows up in that dropdown is your own. If you're a maintainer, what will happen is the dropdown will have everyone who maintains the project. So I work on easy breadcrumbs. And so today there was a security release and there was an issue that was created. So I dropped that down and I selected Greg Boggs and assigned it to him. When I assign myself an issue, I always am very clear. I'm assigning myself this issue. I am going to work on it right now or tomorrow or whatever. And then let's say in a week, when I haven't done it, I will go back and I'll unassign myself and make a note. I didn't have time to work on this. That way people, when they see that the issue is assigned to someone, they understand that you're really working on it. So it's kind of like a courtesy thing. We don't want to be redundant. We want to assign ourselves because we don't want people to work on it at the same time as us, but we want to be respectful of everyone's time too. And then the last one is the summary. This is a description of the issue. And I have the next slide has a screenshot of the summary. You know, there is a issue summary template, and it's recommended that you use this. If it's an issue for a software project, for a non-software project, it applies too. So you just have to be creative with it. So here's a screenshot of the issue summary. And like I said, we already have this template injected in there. Feel free to take out the parts that you don't need. You know, the first step is, you know, indicating what the problem is, you know, why the issue was filed, steps to reproduce the problem. Those are detailed instructions on how to reproduce the issue, including, you know, exact versions, specific paths. You know, I clicked, you know, I can't even think of the Drupal admin menu, you know, structure, blocks, layout, you know, include that path to the problem, and then what actions to take to make the bug. And then we have maybe expected versus actual results, and then proposed resolution. You know, what do you think should happen when this is resolved, you know? And then some of these on like some Contrib issues don't really matter. Like I said, you can kind of pick and choose which ones you want to keep on there. Remaining tasks is handy. If there's a lot of tasks to do, people can go out and when they fill in their comments, they can go back into the issue summary and cross some of those remaining tasks off. If there's any UI, user interface, you know, or API changes, what's expected, you know, list those. And then if there's any data model changes, I don't even know what that means. So most of the time I take that line off of the issue summary. And there are special issue summaries. I don't have the link up here, but it's really searchable, special issue summary templates. There are different issue summaries that aren't in there by default. We have what we call a bear one. This is issues experience, without it's without the explanations. And then we have documentation templates, those are created for documentation issues, for either user guides or readmes. Sometimes we'll switch out the issue summary and use a template for remaining tasks. It takes the section of the issue summary and, just puts it into one. And then we have visual issues, the issue summary template for visual issues involving visual changes or visual regressions. And then we have templates for issue summaries for proposing new initiatives. And that's kind of neat. This goes into the idea queue. It gives you a nice template of like, oh, hey, I have this idea like Mike Herschel did of the Olivero theme. And then it lists all the different things that you should list when you're creating a new initiative. So some general guidelines when we talk about issue summaries, because that's kind of the meat and the potatoes of the issue. We want to make sure that people understand the issue and what's going on. We want to understand where it's at in the life cycle, so that issue summary, like when we talk about triage, the issue summary is very updatable. Don't be scared to update that issue summary as you do things. For accessibility, make sure that you use short, clear, concise sentences. Not everyone is a native English speaker who works in the Drupal issue queue. So making sure that your language is readable is important. If you do know markup or HTML, or you can use the WYSIWYG, use markup for better readability, using bullet lists to break up content or step procedures or headings to break up, a long wall of text. Always identify the key points, make sure that people understand the why of the issue. Include any links to documentation or comments down the line. If someone has a discussion and there's a really good comment, link to comment number 44 because X, Y, and Z. And then again, that UI and API changes section can be left to be determined. For core, a maintainer might come in and fill that out for you. Tags, when do we use tags? We do it for tracking events. I talked about that. We're having MidCamp next week. So our tag will probably be MidCamp 2023. And that way people can do a quick search of the queue and find what other people are working on. We also use tags when maybe something spans across multiple components or projects. And so it really helps find those issues. It really just adds some sort of other classification that the metadata can't use. And then there's some special tags, and this is a screenshot of the issue queue in the block on the right-hand side. It says what issue tags are for that particular issue, and the special tags actually are hoverable and give you some tool tips. This is a screenshot where I hovered over the needs reroll, and it explains what needs reroll means, and this list of issue tags have significant importance. And there's a whole page that's dedicated to explaining why you would use a tag in a certain way. And you can see here, this is the issue tag for easy out of the box. So it's an easy out of the box component. We worked on it on, DrupalCon North America 2021 and also designed for Drupal. It has a patch and needs a reroll. So we're really kind of really honing in and narrowing down what this issue is with the tags. And then triage is, having issues and tasks pre-selected for an event. We go through it and make sure that tasks are cleaned up for novices. That way, when people sit down for contribution day, it's ready to go. And when is it necessary? most of the time it's just making sure that that issue queue summary is up to date and that someone can walk into the issue, look at the issue queue summary, or maybe the last comment, and know exactly what to work on without having to scan any of the comments in the queue. And I want to talk a little bit about issue queue transparency because some of us are new. We want to be kind to folks who are the maintainers or who are working on a particular issue. There is a star button that you can select to follow an issue, but when you comment on an issue, you automatically follow it. So if you change a status, if you create a comment, whoever is following that will get an email each and every time that there's a comment or a status change. So I just want to make sure that we're mindful about when and how we make comments. So talking about transparency, the issue queue is not a scary place, especially if you kind of announce that you're a novice, you say that it's your first time doing something, but also like be transparent. Like if you're adding a tag, why are you adding the tag? Okay, I go in the queue and I say MidCamp 2023. I'm not just going to leave it at that. I'm going to say, we're going to work on this at MidCamp 2023. I changed the status from needs review to reviewed and to be tested. I don't want just to change it. I want the person to understand why I changed it. I did these steps. I think that this patch is valid. I think that this merge request can be merged in, and I give the reasons. And that way it's not a mystery why I moved it from one status to another. If I have people helping me at an issue, most of the time, like at Contrib Day, you'll be working at a table with people, but it's not always appropriate for everyone to make a comment that they're working on it. So there'll be kind of like someone who will make a comment for the whole group. I'll say, Volkswagen chick working on this issue at MidCamp, Bob, Sarah, Stefan, and Adrian are here at the table with me. And that way the maintainers know who worked on the issue with me, and that way they can give appropriate credit later. And then when I'm assigning myself an issue, I like to say, AmyJune, I'm assigning myself this issue because I'm going to work on a patch right now. I have the documentation ready to go. And then when I'm done, I'll unassign myself that task. And then there's some etiquette, and this is the last section, so I'm not going to bore you too much longer. We want to make sure that we report the issue in the correct place or project. Like I said, there's that autocomplete field, but don't think too much about that. If you sometimes it's hard to know what project the bug is in if you're working on, a web form, but you don't know if the bug is in web form or if it's in, a core. So someone might come back later and change that, like, oh no, this is a bug in core, not in web form. Do try to solve the problem yourself before creating an issue report. Maybe it's not a bug. Read documentation and reread it and reread it, to really make sure that you understand that it is an issue. Read that documentation before creating an issue. Make sure you download the latest version and see if your issue has already been fixed there, because sometimes it's a non-issue at that point. And then do try to get help from the community by other means. Sometimes you can click on, I think the breadcrumb is resources support on Drupal.org, and you can find other support options. Slack is a great place. The forums, I see some people posting in them, but not too often, but there are other places to ask questions. This is specifically asking questions, not reporting bugs. There are other places to ask questions other than the issue queue. Again, if you find a similar issue, consider whether or not your issue is really the same, or if you should create a new issue. Maybe that issue is marked closed and very few people will see your post. Maybe project maintainers will see your post. So always check the status of an issue and avoid posting in closed issues because no one really sees that. If the issue is open, and you have more details that could help get that bug resolved quicker or understood, add those. And then, confirm if the bug is still relevant. I'm still getting this bug. Helps the maintainers know that it's a real issue. Provide as many details as you can, description as the problem, using that issue summary template, what version of Drupal, what version of PHP maybe, what actions did you perform to see the bug? What did you expect to see rather than what really happened? And then if the error came about as a result of some code you wrote, paste that snippet in there as well. An important thing about the issue queue is to be grateful. There are really talented and hardworking people giving their time, a lot of time for free. So saying thank you costs you nothing and makes the person who has given you their 10 minutes or 20 minutes or a day of their life fixing that issue, they're glad that they did so, just that like little bit of thanks. And if you're a project maintainer, make sure that you give proper credit to those who assisted in fixing an issue by checking the box, next to their name and give them credit, because that'll help people come back and want to help out when they're attributed. Coming back and telling the community if a solution worked for you or not is really super helpful. You'll help the people who come after you when they look, oh, that patch worked. I can see that because, Bob wrote that solution worked for him. And some don'ts. Don't report a security issue in a regular Drupal issue queue. That will expose the vulnerability to the public. There's a special issue queue just for reporting security issues. Along the lines of, being grateful, we don't want to be ungrateful. We don't want to say things like, hey, XYZ module doesn't work. We want to try to elaborate and add details so the community has, a easier gauge of fixing it. We don't want to have the title be, site broken, you must fix this now. That's not going to get you a lot of people wanting to help you. But making sure that title is like, admin modules page blank after installing, the admin toolbar. We don't want to hijack people's issues. We want to make sure that we don't ask questions that aren't relevant in someone else's issue. Be considerate, it would be more logical to post a new issue. Don't post a question and then not follow up with any responses. If you managed to solve your problem, or even if you gave up, go back and say that you did. Nobody will mind if this causes a little bit of wasted time. Stuff happens, life gets in the way. They'll understand that, this means someone has to think about the problem and spend time responding to it. So going back and telling them that you figured it out will really help save time and not have that redundancy churn. We are a global project. Sometimes all of us don't communicate in the same ways. So it's really important not to take things personally. Most people will be very helpful. But some maintainers get harassed on a daily basis by strangers wanting answers to their questions. So for you to get snappy or sarcastic may not be ideal, but sometimes that comes with the territory, especially like with some cultural or maybe English as a second language barriers. But don't be afraid to ask questions. If you've made the slightest effort to follow the issue queue etiquette, it'll be obvious and people will be really tolerant of any mistakes that you make. We talked a little bit about this. Don't assign yourself an issue unless you want to work on it. Don't use random tags. Don't add random keywords. They aren't helpful. Again, unless you're creating an event or a maintainer, the issue tag that you're looking for already exists. Don't go in there and mark an issue reviewed and tested by the community, that's RTBC, without actually testing it. Make sure you do all the steps to replicate before you move that status to test it. Don't upload screenshots of your terminal that says the patch is applying. That is not helpful. It takes up disk space, or server space, and we know that the more server space we use up, the more carbon footprint we leave, so it's just not helpful. Don't upload screenshots of patches applying. And then don't change the status of an issue from fixed to closed. The issue will automatically change once the maintainer marks it fixed, it will automatically change to closed in 2 weeks. And we want to leave it open for 2 weeks just in case someone else has some input on it. And then, okay, so I talk a little bit about tools. And this is where I talk about Drupal Pod. So Drupal Pod is a great thing. I don't know if anyone's familiar with Simply Test Me. It was an online a browser-based solution for testing patches. And the project's a little antiquated now because we don't really want to use patches. And that's, unless you understand how to convert that merge request to a patch. But Simply Test Me is not maintained the way it used to be. So Ofer Shaw came up with Drupal Pod, coming off of Get Pod. I'll share the link in the meetup space, or maybe Bob can put the link in for oh, I have it. I'll put it in chat. So there's this Drupal Pod. There's instructions on how to use it. It's a browser extension. It may only be for Firefox and Chrome. I'm not sure. I only use Firefox. But now what I'm going to do is I'm going to do a little bit of a demo. And just so you know, you do need to have a GitHub account. You can have a free account to download this extension. But anyway, I picked an issue. Well, here's the project page for Drupal Pod. You can see that there's instructions. Okay, it's for Chrome and Firefox. The instructions are really basic. Go to any issue, click on the Drupal Pod extension, and then select a branch. So we'll do that right now. So here's an issue for Smart Trim. It's a merge request. We can see that right here. What we do is up here in the corner, I have this Drupal Pod extension. I select it. It already pre-populates the project name, the version that I'm currently working on, because that was supplied in the metadata here. It takes a lot of this metadata and populates it for us. What version of Drupal core do you want? You can select what branch you want. You can choose a patch. There's no patches on this module, so we're not going to do that. And then you can pick your installation profile. So I just usually pick standard. And then what you do is you select Open Dev Environment, and then I already spun it up, but what will happen is Get Pod will bounce around a little bit. It'll make sure that you're logged into GitHub, and then it will, oh, I timed out. It will spin up this browser-based, oh, great. I had this open so we wouldn't have to do this. Hopefully it doesn't take too long. But essentially what it does is it opens up an environment for you that's online that you can share with someone. So I can send this URL to Tara and Tara can work on it. There's VS Code in there, so you can see someone actively working on the code with you. This is what I get for trying to avoid this happening. But anyway, it builds this Drupal instance that's online and you can test the code for you. So you can see, I'm going to have a terminal here. It's going to spin up a site right here that we can go to. We have all of our files over here. So it really reduces the barrier to entry of not having to have a local environment to work on Drupal issues. So I guess I hit Unami the last time. So we have our terminal output. We have some instructions out here. We have all of our files, and then we can select this button here and it will open our Drupal site for us. So how cool is that? You'll have the merge request. It's already loaded. It just makes contributing to Drupal a little bit more straightforward and lowers the barrier to having that local environment. And that's what I have. Any questions? And then just to be clear, next Next week, when I do the Contrib workshop on contribution day, I'll talk about specifically like different projects, especially projects that aren't necessarily code-based. I'll talk about how to get into contributing to Drupal initiatives. I'll talk about actually creating a merge request. It'll be some of the same stuff, but a lot more like finding what you want to work on, diving into your skill set, diving into your passions, and finding, the specific initiative that fits with the things that align with what you want to work on. Yeah.
Yay, AmyJune.
Cool.
Very cool. Very awesome. Remember the first time I did this at DrupalCon Denver in 2008, or no, that was DC. I don't know when it was. It was not that long ago though. In dog years, but but it took me like 3/4 of the day to get ready to do anything because I couldn't get my damn local set up. It just was not working.
Yeah, and as a mentor, like in the room, we would have like hundreds of people and we'd spend hours on the local environment. And then there'd be someone with a Windows machine and we're like, well,
Yeah.
good luck, right?
You'd walk over to the guy that was the IT director and he'd look at you like, what the hell am I doing? What, don't you guys have this figured out? Like,
yeah, and there was bandwidth issues, like downloading the tools on the machines, and we'd walk around with USB sticks, and it's like,
oh my
oh yeah,
God.
I'm going to take a random USB stick at DrupalCon and stick it in my machine.
The pain. Yeah. So bad.
So Drupal
Okay.
Pod's like really straightforward, and again, you have to use Firefox and Chrome, but I think that's
I'm